My guest, David Pakman, is the host of the television, radio, and internet political program, The David Pakman Show. It's currently airing on over 160 television and radio stations. And David has been making the rounds in recent days because he interviewed 4 years ago the alleged Kansas City shooter, the raging anti Semite Glenn Miller, or Glenn Cross, as he's been called. I've been on with David a number of times on his show. We've had our disagreements. This is my first time to have David on with me. So, David, welcome to my program. Welcome to The Line of Fire.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, when you have to go, which will be in our second segment, you can do what I did to you the last time and wrap it up and say you got to get out of here, all right?
Well, I tend not to do that. I like to be a good guest and stay on until the host says we've concluded the interview.
All right. Well, I got it. Fair enough. But I'll be conscious of your time. David, you've been making the rounds on major networks, CNN and others, discussing the interview you did with Glenn Miller. The reason I wanted to have you on was because you spoke about religious extremists, homophobes, and then this gentleman in that same category, and you didn't seem to qualify it. So I was thinking if we could get you on the air, that we could qualify some things and at least we could have a better understanding. So could you define for me first homophobia?
Well, so to be honest, I was hesitant to come on your show because the article on WorldNet Daily, number one, it has 20 comments after 19 hours. So I was like, do I really need to respond to something that nobody else seems to be paying much attention to? And also, it had so many inaccuracies in it. But then I thought, you've been a good guy by being on my show. It would be hypocritical if I turned down your invitation. But I think that...
Oh, yeah, especially when I get so blatantly misrepresented and the comments that follow your YouTube videos are the most extremist, hateful, bigoted, ugly comments, some even wishing for harm to come to me, and that hasn't stopped me from coming on. So anyway,
no
back
question.
to...
And of course, Michael, when you post to your page the interviews you do with me, many of your followers wishing the same on me. But I want to think about positive things. I think you may have misunderstood what I said, so let me explain. Not everybody who is against same-sex marriage is an extremist homophobe. I want to be really clear because when I went on these programs, they're 4 to 5 minute segments. You know how they don't give you any time at all. So I want to be really, really clear. If you are, for example, you believe gay men and women should be treated just like everybody else, you have no problem with it being against the law to fire someone simply because they're gay, you think the term fag is offensive, but you're just not comfortable defining marriage or allowing marriage to be two men or two women, I don't think you're an extremist homophobe. I disagree with you. As you know, I don't think that that's the right position. It's an increasingly unpopular position if we look at the polling, but I am not considering those people to be extremists. The extremists are the ones who go around screaming that they or God or whoever hate fags. They support anti-science so-called treatments like ex-gay therapy. They say gay people are demonically possessed. Those
All right, so yeah, hang on. So you threw in a whole bunch of things there. So you're qualifying that some people are not extremist homophobes, but if we just come back and start with, could you define homophobia? And then I had a couple of questions about extremism, and you can comment on some of your own clips.
Extremism is something that we've talked about on my program quite a bit, and whether it's religious extremism, homophobia, racism, etc., I'm interested in what's the source of that.
All right, Michael Brown here. My guest, David Pakman, is the host of the television, radio, and internet political program, The David Pakman Show, and I've been a guest with David a few times already. David, I know you're super busy doing interviews, so I do appreciate you coming on with me. Again, my concern, that was a clip when you were on with Aaron Burnett, CNN. The word homophobia is used so freely. I'm constantly bashed as a homophobe because I don't endorse homosexual practice or homosexual marriage as being God's ideal or what I want to see in society. There are people who call me religious extremist because I believe the Bible is God's word. Here we have a horrific situation with the Kansas City shooter, who we all agree is an extremist, and we're both Jews. I mean, he hates us, regardless of our political or religious beliefs. And the terms are used so freely, And it seems in what you're saying, it plays right into that when you put everyone in the same class without ever defining or nuancing at all, which I think is pretty easy to do. So that's why I thought it would just be helpful if you could define what you mean by homophobia.
I don't know how relevant it is for me to be defining words. I'm not the dictionary, but for the sake of picking something, I would say homophobia would be the dictionary definition, right? An extreme and or irrational aversion or fear of homosexuality and gay people.
All right, totally agree with you. So in your mind, am I a homophobe?
I don't know your full repertoire. I mean, in the conversations I've had with you, that's the feeling I got. I mean, I'm not the authority, Michael, so I don't know if it's relevant for me to comment on that, right? I mean, when I was speaking on the Aaron Burnett show, I had very limited time, and what I indicated was I've spoken with extremists from all of these venues. But as I said in the first segment, which, by the way, was like the shortest radio segment I've ever heard of on any show.
Yeah, it's just an introductory one. That's how it is.
Yeah, it's just not everybody who is against legal same-sex marriage is an extremist homophobe. I made that very clear. I would disagree with them, but that doesn't make them extremist homophobes.
But you keep putting extremist homophobe together. Just homophobe. I mean, it's remarkable to me, and every time I've ever been on with you, and if you've read what I've written or any statement I've ever made, I've made perfectly clear that if there was an act of violence or anyone inciting hatred, I would stand against it. I do stand against it, but I'm not going to redefine marriage based on that, on someone's romantic attraction or sexual desires, nor am I going to rewrite the Bible based on that. And for you to say, well, it could be homophobe, and then here, I just want you to hear what people are hearing. Let's play clip number 5 on Alan Combs, because to me, you're making things very unclear. And by the way, I can write articles that get viewed by tens of thousands of people, and I have 10 comments, and articles that have 10,000 comments. You don't know by the amount of comments. But the fact is, I wasn't the only one wondering when they heard this. So I'm just looking for clarity. Clip number 5.
With all the extremists I interview, anti-gay, religious extremists, whoever it may be, I always think that they're very close to going over the edge from where it goes from just being rhetoric to being real-world action and violence. Yeah. So I wasn't uniquely surprised that this was the case, but when it happens with someone you've interviewed, of course it impacts you.
Yeah, and by the way, you did a super job on that interview. It was chilling to listen to in retrospect, but I commend you for the way you did the interview and handled yourself in the midst of it, which is not as easy to do as some people might think. But can you see what I'm hearing and others are hearing, that you are now suggesting that perhaps a committed Christian, someone like me, who is not going to hurt someone, I'd lay down my life to protect someone, that perhaps someone like me on your show or someone else say, we might just be one step away from doing something crazy like this. This is what people are hearing in the emotional charged soundbite society we live in today. So you have the opportunity to clarify that for all of our listeners.
I'm just not sure what the question is, Michael. I mean, I interview all sorts of people. You never know who's eventually going to commit some kind of act. I don't see the future. I just don't know what you're asking me. I'm sorry.
Okay, when you say with all of these extremists, and then you mention anti-gay, religious, you mention it without qualifying. So in your book, I'm anti-gay. If I just said with all these Jews I interview, I have no idea who's going off the deep end next. Well, that includes you, because you were a Jew on my show. It's inflammatory. And when you look, the environment out there. I was just collecting before the show here the latest death wishes on myself or colleagues. Here's one from a gay man. Try that hate speech here, and you and I can see who wins at a knife fight. I would enjoy cutting your heart out. All right, to me, it's just rhetoric. But when you have that being expressed, you're not addressing that on your show. You're not having guests like that on your show. You're not calling them extremists. And by general definition, if we hold to the Bible and oppose same-sex marriage, we're now homophobes. Hey, we may be the next ones to go off the deep end. That seems to be what you're saying.
I mean, Michael, I'm not saying anything about anybody specific, but there's plenty of violence against gay people. So we know that there are some homophobes who commit violence against gay people, but I think you're trying to make a controversy out of nothing. I mean, there is violence against gay people, and I don't know who is going to commit that violence. What else do you want me to say? I just don't see the controversy.
Couldn't it be said, we're both communicators, we both have audiences, couldn't it be said, look, there are plenty of guests I have who differ with us on social moral issues, and they're not violent people, and I'm not talking about them, but there are these extremists, rather than painting with a broad brush. Here, let me ask you to respond. Clip number 2, maybe this will help, and I'm not gonna beat a dead horse, but let's just try it one more time. Again, as you're on with Aaron Burnett, clip number 2.
Were you ever concerned for your own safety? This is someone who, by the way, has been implicated in the murder of another
liberal Jewish radio host in 1984. He only served 3 years for that. Yeah, with all of these extremists, I think they're all on the edge of rhetoric becoming real-world violence. So a lot of people today have asked me, was there any sign that he specifically was ready to go further? We had the evidence from 1984 that he had gone further, but at the time there was nothing that made him stand out from the other extremists.
All right, the other extremists, who are by definition people like millions of Americans who believe the Bible and don't want to redefine marriage. We are homophobes in your book. Homophobia is one of the categories of extremism that you mentioned. All of them could be on the edge. It's complete broad-brushed, totally non-nuanced, and it's going to create a lot of fear and further hatred.
No, it's not broad brushed because it's based specifically on people that have been on my program. It's based on the threats that I get after I interview them that sometimes have to go to authorities. I don't know everybody in the country, right? What I know is after the people that have been on my show, like Miller and others, have finished their interview, I get identical types of emails, tweets, comments, and threats, whether the person on my show espoused an anti-Jewish, anti-gay, anti-whatever view. The reaction is almost identical, so I don't know who's going to do what.
All right, look, I've been getting emails or Facebook posts last few days, some Muslims responding to things I said with some of the ugliest stuff. We had to actually ban them. And then the typical
so you don't know
gay rhetoric.
You don't know who of them is going to commit violence, and I don't know either. We all get threats, and any of them might commit violence.
But I'm always careful to make a distinction between radical Muslims and your average Muslim living next door. No, look, you could be the nicest person in the world living next door and suddenly burn the house down and do something crazy. Any human being could do anything. But I'm constant. Look, when I mention you on the air, when I talk about threats that we get and things like that, which to me is, for the most part, just empty words, I said, David Pakman's not going to hurt. No, I can't guarantee that, but I want to make plain that I wouldn't think that you would do something like that. Or as ridiculous as some of the SPLC listings are, I make plain, no, I don't think they're out to hurt me physically or something. I'm constantly trying to make that distinction. Would it be that hard? Just say, look, there are plenty of people who don't endorse homosexuality or believe the Bible to be God's word, and they're not homophobes and they're not violent people, but there are plenty of crazy people out there. Would that be so hard to do?
So if I understand correctly, I just want to make sure I get it because I do want to communicate well and understand. The reason for having me on your program, writing this article on WorldNet Daily, all of this is that in a 4-minute corporate media segment, I wasn't nuanced enough about the fact that not all homophobes will commit violence. Is that really the issue for all of this stuff?
Well, first thing, it's a bunch of appearances. It's what's on your channel. It's pretty much the standard thing. And even what you just said was inflammatory because you used the homophobe term again.
That's a term. That's a term. Somebody who is a homophobe has an irrational and extreme fear of or aversion to homosexuality. It's
right,
which
is not
You're
which
mad
is
at me
not
for the dictionary.
Right, but it's not me. And now you put it on me. I might as
Whoever
well say.
Whoever mentioned your name, Michael? I never mentioned your name in any of those appearances. You're very self-centered to think I'm talking about you.
Well, David, God bless you, buddy. We're out of time. Well, I would have loved to have had more time with David. He only had 15 minutes, and by the time we told him he could stay on longer, I don't know if he was still there, but he wasn't able to anyway. So Let me just take one more minute on this. I, again, don't want to beat a dead horse here. Mark in Charlotte, North Carolina, thanks for calling the Line of Fire.
Hey, pleasure to be on. So my comment was with regards to David Pakman when he was on there. Initially, I was going to agree with what you had said before the break, saying that, maybe it is the plan all along to go ahead and equate, racist and violent views with those who hold to biblical definitions of marriage, which you came out and said. So really my comment now is I'm wondering aloud if it really is the best approach to be giving the benefit of the doubt to those who are appearing to equate the two, appearing to equate biblical views of marriage with violent, murderous, racists, or would it be better to directly confront people like Pakman and not really let them get away with it? I mean, I get the impression from David Pakman, he's certainly very eloquent, but he's got that sort of wide-eyed, innocent persona, to be like, well, are you making it all about you? I never said it was about you, and trying to deflect from what he's really trying to say. He absolutely is trying to equate the two, and I think that perhaps the strategy should be different to call him on the carpet on it instead of giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Well, I appreciate the comments and the evaluation. The first thing is this. I always want to give the benefit of the doubt unless it's foolish. In any situation I'm dealing with, interpersonally, in ministry situations, in situations like this, because it's very easy to misread, it's very easy to perceive things wrongly, or to have limited information. And if I'm going to err, to say it properly, I want to start there. Obviously not stick my head in the sand. That being said, I will raise concerns. So my concerns were, where is the nuancing? David's a communicator. I'm a communicator. Those of us that are on radio, TV, we're communicators. Hopefully we can think pretty quickly because we're in situations where you often don't have a lot of time to speak or a lot of time to react, and you have to weigh your words carefully as much as you're able. So hence the opportunity. I wrote an article, and as soon as the article was out, we asked David to come on the air and say, okay, here's what I've written. Here's what you understand my issues are. You have the opportunity to clarify. And then if there was some type of renouncing of that, I would have then appended something to the article or posted something widely on Facebook and other places to circulate it as much as I could to say, I appreciate David Pakman saying X, Y, Z.
Sure,
now,
right.
in fairness to him, he interviews a ton of people. I've been on with him a few times, but he interviews tons of people, and I'm sure he has some crazy people that he interviews, and I get some crazy calls as well. But let's say his show reaches out to people more like that, so he would have some that we would all agree are extremists that are on. But the problem is I do know how he views us. Right. The homophobe word was used quite plainly. And from here on, my view is if he doesn't nuance things, then it is intentional. Then he does want your average person to think, yeah, the Christian or the Jew or just the moral person who disagrees with redefining marriage and who does not sanction two men or two women in a romantic and sexual relationship, that person is a homophobe and therefore is in the same group as all these others.
Did you catch the one word that he kept saying, too, when he would say, homophobe is defined as somebody who has an irrational aversion or fear of? I'm wondering if focusing on the whole irrational part of it might be a good strategy to say, hey, you might say it's irrational to base it on the Bible. Here's why it's not. Or you may say it's irrational to say that it's not good for society. Here's why, apart from the Bible, we hold these views. So just kind of confronting it on that level as well. To say you want to use the word homophobe, however, it's not irrational with my point of view. You may disagree, but it's not irrational.
Look, the fact is, and Mark, of course, I agree with that. I had just printed up the definition, which he basically used, that homophobia, irrational fear of, aversion to, discrimination against homosexuals. But even using that, then you could say, here, let's look at it like this. if we're sitting in a room and it's 100 square foot room, it's a really big room, or 500 square foot room, excuse me, and we're sitting there talking, and suddenly you start freaking out because you think you're going to be buried alive in this room. Well, that's an irrational fear, right? Because it's claustrophobia or something. It's an irrational fear. You know, sometimes we deal with it with our kids. They have an irrational fear of something. Well, from the viewpoint of the homosexuality is perfectly acceptable, it is as right and normal as heterosexuality, 2 men, 2 women have the right to, quote, marry, etc., then the only opposition you can have to it is irrational. In other words, there are people who actually believe that the only possible reason that you do not endorse homosexual practice is because of your religious beliefs, which they will say are irrational and antiquated, or because of some ick factor that you have because you have a problem with it, which is also irrational. And that's obviously an issue to overcome. That's why the word has been used strategically for a long time.
Exactly.
Yeah, but Mark, I do appreciate the call. And, hey, listen, I'm glad I can interact with David, and he's a Jewish person like I am. The greatest thing would be to see him come to know Jesus as Messiah. Just like people prayed for me when I didn't welcome it, let's be praying for David. Thanks for the call, Mark. I appreciate it.